What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Primetime Sports Podcast, hosted by Joey Mayor-Larry. So today, going to catch up on a lot of things I haven't really talked about over the last few weeks. Been busy with work, but I'm going to catch up on some NFL headlines, talk about some things going on in the NBA, and also mention a few MLB trades that have happened over the last week. So let's start out with some recent news in the NFL, and this is now 2 weeks ago now, just about. Brian Daboll was fired from the New York Giants head coach position. Daboll went 20-40-1, 20 wins, 40 losses, and a tie over 4 years with the New York Giants. Over his last 3 years, the Giants were 11-33 before he was fired. 11-33 over that 44-game span was the worst record in the NFL over the last 3 years at the point when Daboll was fired. Over the last 2 seasons, Daboll had a 185 win percentage, which is abysmal. There were the same mistakes week in and week out, blown leads in the fourth quarter with bad collapses, poor red zone offense, bad roster management. There were a lot of things that went wrong with the Giants over the last few years, so it made sense to get rid of Daboll. The Giants have tried different coordinators over the last few years. They fired Wink Martindale at one point, which Daboll actually fired 2 of his 3 coordinators during his time. He replaced 5 of 9 position coaches during his time as well. That was a stat from Bobby Skinner. And the Giants started 7 different quarterbacks during the Daboll era while Daboll was head coach, and he had no winning record with any of them. Results are very important in this industry. The Giants lost far too many games that were supposed to be winnable games this year with Daboll, and then even with Kafka in the last 2 games this year. I think the real issue for the Giants is they were playing some good teams this year in those games that they blew leads, like a 26-8 lead against Denver, who Denver is a good team, but at the end of the day, when you're up 26-8 with 5:19 to go in the fourth quarter, you need to win that game. When you're up 20-10 against Chicago with 3 minutes and 58 seconds left, you need to win that game. When you're up 37-34 against Dallas with 14 seconds left to go, you need to win that game. The Giants lost all 3 of those games that I just mentioned. And per Joe Shane MVP, which is a Twitter account, it's a New York Giants fan that has a Twitter account, Joe Shane MVP. According to that account, against the Cowboys, Broncos, and Bears, the Giants had a 92.3%, 99.3%, and a 96.9% chance of winning late in the fourth quarter in each of those 3 games against Dallas, Denver, and Chicago. And the Giants lost all 3 of those games, which was, according to the account, a 1 in 60,000 chance of happening, that the Giants would lose all 3 games. And, of course, the Giants did blow all 3 of those leads. The Denver game was really the one that was the end of the Daboll era, in my opinion. And this is a stat from Jeff Kerr of CBS. Teams that lost 1,602 straight games, went down 18 points or more in the final 6 minutes of an NFL game. Somehow, someway, the Giants broke that streak, letting Denver beat them after 1,602 teams lost games where they trailed by 18 or more points with 6 minutes left in a game. The Giants were the first one to break that streak, losing to Denver. Denver broke that streak with the win over the Giants earlier this season. And that was the end of the Daboll era, in my opinion. The Giants somehow gave up a lead that seemed like it was impossible to lose in, but somehow, someway, the Giants found a way to lose. And I remember watching that game, and I remember my mom saying, "Oh, they're up by 18 points with 6 minutes left." I remember saying to her vividly, I said, "It's not over," especially when you watch this Giants defense play and the way the Giants have played over the last few seasons. No lead is safe, especially considering how bad their run defense is. I just felt like they couldn't tackle. And also, other teams just find ways to win, and we always just find ways to lose. And that was a great example of it. The Giants found a way to lose. That was the first time a team lost in a scenario like that since 2003, where they were up 18 or more points with 6 minutes left to go in a game. There was a lot of promise for Daboll in year 1. The Giants were 9-7-1 that season. They won a playoff game. Despite very low expectations heading into that year, they found a way to win a playoff game, which was great against Minnesota. But over the past few years, they were uncompetitive in the division. They struggled to win games where they had big leads and had a good chance to win. Results are very important, as I've already said. I wish Daboll well, and I think he'll be a very good offensive coordinator if he chooses to be an offensive coordinator sometime next year, before maybe pursuing another head coaching job at some point. But he did struggle to close games as a head coach. I think that was his biggest issue. It just seemed like a lot of games we were supposed to win, I think the Giants even knew when they were on the field they were going to lose that game, and that's just not what you want. And I'm not too sure what the locker room looked like with Brian Daboll, so I can't really speak to that. But just watching it from a fan's perspective, when I'm watching the Giants play, it just felt like they knew they were going to lose some games. And that's actually a quote from Boomer Esiason. He said it on the radio like a month ago that the Giants go into games thinking they're going to lose, and that's just based on what he thought when he's watching them play. And then when I'm watching them play as well, I feel like they know they're going to lose some games. So that's not what you can have. So obviously the head coach is going to be to blame when that happens, but I do think the GM, Joe Shane, should be to blame as well. Keeping him does not make sense to me. As of right now, the recent reports said that Joe Shane is going to be a part of the next head coaching search. I don't think that should be the case. This is the third time that John Mara has relieved a head coach of his duties without the GM being fired. And that trend is that the GM somehow stays. He gets to pick a new head coach. And then 2 years later, both the GM and that new head coach is also fired before the team completely restarts the cycle again where there's a new head coach, new GM. Then 3 or 4 years later, somewhere in that window, the head coach is fired, the GM stays, the GM gets an extra few seasons with a new head coach before they're both eventually fired after year 2 with that new head coach. So we'll see what happens. I do think Joe Shane needs to go. He missed on Evan Neal with the 7th overall pick in the 2022 NFL Draft. He missed with Deonte Banks in the 2023 NFL Draft. Jalen Hyatt, who somehow still dresses for games but doesn't play, shouldn't be on the active roster right now, especially considering he's taking up a roster spot and he doesn't ever play. That's poor roster management. You also add in all the kicking woes that the Giants have had over recent years, with Graham Gano missing multiple games with an injury, and then also adding in his injuries before games where the Giants were left without a kicker in some games where they could have potentially won had they had a kicker. So that's costing us potential wins as well. Then you look at some of the other players he's drafted. Theo Johnson is starting to progress more, so that was a good draft pick. Tyler Nubin was great in his first year, if I remember right, and then this year he's kind of regressed. Drew Phillips has struggled at times, although he was a very good value pick considering where the Giants took him, in the middle rounds of the NFL draft. If I remember right, he was a 3rd-round pick. I just think when you look at this team right now, I think they need a new fresh start completely in the scouting department, the front office completely, new GM, new head coach, new offensive coordinator, new defense coordinator. They need to start over completely. And they're starting to do that, obviously, with Brian Daboll being gone. And the Giants actually did just fire the defensive coordinator, Shane Bowen. He was let go after yesterday's game, which the Giants were up against Detroit yesterday by 10 points with 11 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. The Giants were up 27-17. Jameis Winston, for the most part, played very well in that game. Did have a bad interception that really costed the Giants, but he did play well overall, gave them a chance to win. And if Jameis Winston started earlier in the season and started those 3 games that Russell Wilson started, I think the Giants would have won at least one game earlier on this year. Jameis Winston is just a little bit more competitive throwing the ball than Russ. Russ was a little bit more conservative throwing the ball, may not turn the ball over as much as Jameis Winston will, but I do think you have more of a chance to score points when you have Jameis at quarterback than Russell Wilson. With it being said, I want to get back to defensive coordinator Shane Bowen being fired. The Giants ranked 30th in total yards per game from a defense, and also 30th as well in points allowed per game this year. So yards allowed per game and points allowed per game. The Giants were 30th in the NFL, which is bottom 3. They do have a lot of pieces. I'm not going to say everybody on that defense is a superstar like Brian Byrne and Dexter Lawrence, but there is a lot of potential on that defense. Kayvon Thibodeau is very much a good pass rusher, even if he's not necessarily living up to the full hype of being the 5th overall pick. He's a serviceable pass rusher who's a good player. You also have Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, Abdul Carter. There is a lot of talent on that defense, especially Cordell Flott. He's really emerged for the Giants. But when you look at a lot of these losses, it's just been really tough decision-making, especially defensively, where yesterday Jahmyr Gibbs runs for a 70-yard touchdown with Dexter Lawrence out of the game. So you're subbing Dexter Lawrence out of the game at a wrong time, which really cost the Giants yesterday of a potential win. You also add in that Denver game, the Giants pass rush didn't show up in the last 5 minutes of that game. And that's really what gave Denver a chance to get back in the game, because the Giants pass rush was just letting Bo Nix kind of throw the ball downfield and do what he needed to do to try to get Denver back in that game. And I do remember in that Dallas game as well, the Giants were up by 3 with about 20 seconds left to go, and they were playing complete prevent defense, playing far back with defensive backs all sagging off and giving the Dallas Cowboys room to work with over the middle. Dallas did have timeouts to work with at that point, which basically allowed them just to move the ball down the field and then get in field goal range of Brandon Aubrey to line up for a game-tying field goal, and then the Giants end up losing in overtime. Similar story yesterday, just bad defensive alignment from Shane Bowen. So the Giants end up moving on from him, which is the right decision. The Giants' defense has been horrid this year, one of the worst run defenses I've ever seen. Poor tackling, they're not in the right position. I know they've had a lot of injuries, and I know there's going to be a lot of teams that have been battling injuries at this point in the season. But the way the Giants have played with the talent they have in the pass rush, the defense really shouldn't be that bad. So it's disappointing what the Giants' defenses look like overall this year. So it makes sense that the Giants moved on from Bowen. It makes sense that the Giants moved on from Brian Daboll. I think Daboll seems like a very good guy and a guy that a lot of players want to play for. But when you're looking at the results on the field, the Giants were struggling. They weren't getting any better with Daboll. They were losing a lot of close games they were supposed to win when they have double-digit leads in the fourth quarter. Changes were needed. And I think when you look at this Giants team, this was their fifth time yesterday, blowing a 10-point lead on the road. And if you flip those 5 games, you win all 5 of them, the Giants wouldn't be 2-10 right now. They would be 7-5. So it'd be a much different looking season had the Giants played better defense in those situations and were able to close out games. It's partly on the defensive coordinator. It's partly on the head coach. It's partly on the players. There's a lot of blame that can go around when your team's 2-10. But I do think the defense coordinator, Shane Bowen, needs to do better play calling in those situations. You can't let Dallas just move the ball downfield to set up for a game-tying field goal. And the same thing goes for even yesterday. You're letting Jahmyr Gibbs run for a 70-yard touchdown with Dexter Lawrence out of the game. Dexter Lawrence hasn't really played up to expectations this year. He's honestly struggled, in my opinion. I know he's going up against a double team a lot of the time, so it's not necessarily an easy matchup. But you do need more from Dexter Lawrence. But when he's off the field, obviously there's no good that's happening. He's not doing you any good when he's sitting on the bench. So that was a disappointment yesterday, seeing him on the bench in a big situation where Gibbs had a breakaway touchdown. So the Giants end up moving on from Shane Bowen, but as I said, I think they need to kind of move on from everybody and restart and have a complete new era with a new front office, new head coach, and new coordinators. And another issue when you look at this Giants team is when players leave the Giants, they're better off. Saquon Barkley leaves the Giants. He's Offensive Player of the Year and then also wins a Super Bowl. Daniel Jones, another example, leaves the Giants, and he's 8-3 this year with the Colts with 17 passing touchdowns and 5 rushing touchdowns. And they're right now one of the best teams in the AFC and a team definitely to fear for the Super Bowl. Daniel Jones is a guy I stayed with through every single step of the way. All of the ups and downs, with Giants fans blaming him, with Brian Daboll and Joe Shane probably saying he was the reason they were losing games. And then obviously now Daniel Jones leaves, and he's winning games elsewhere while the Giants are still losing the same way that they have been losing with Daniel Jones and without Daniel Jones. So Daniel Jones wasn't the issue in New York. I never thought he was the issue in New York. You can listen to any of my episodes I mentioned Daniel Jones. I stayed supporting him every step of the way because I saw a lot of talent in Daniel Jones' game, and I knew there was not enough around him to succeed in New York. And I knew obviously the pressure from the fans was going to be tough in New York, and the fans just were all over him, and I felt like people were rooting against him at times, but he just wasn't set up to succeed in New York. You go to a place like the Colts where there's a good offensive line, a very good run game, good weapons, a good defense, quarterback-friendly offensive coordinator and a quarterback-friendly head coach. And then you also add in, you're in the Indianapolis area. The media isn't as harsh on you like it is in New York City. So I think that was another thing that's helped Daniel Jones. He's just a little bit outside the media now in comparison to where he was in New York. A lot more fingers are being pointed at you on Monday morning when you lose than what's happening in Indiana when you lose. And you also add in, I know Brian Daboll was a quarterback-friendly offensive coordinator. Obviously got Josh Allen to progress during his time in Buffalo, and now Josh Allen's MVP candidate every year. But Brian Daboll didn't have that success with Daniel Jones, and I think a lot of finger-pointing probably happened behind the scenes with Daniel Jones being pointed at for the reason the Giants were losing games, especially from the fans' perspective. I know a lot of fans blame Daniel Jones for the reason the Giants were losing games, but that really wasn't the case. Now you see it, obviously he's been winning elsewhere. Xavier McKinney leaves the Giants. He has a career year defensively last year and leads the NFL in interceptions. Leonard Williams and Julian Love leave the Giants. They both have Pro Bowl years after leaving New York. It just seems like if you leave the New York Giants, you end up playing better off elsewhere. And I think that's definitely an indictment on Joe Shane and Brian Daboll, that guys are having more success after leaving the Giants in free agency or via trade. And the example of Leonard Williams, it's just tough to see that guys are not really playing as well in New York as they do other places. And coaching in the front office is definitely to blame, in my opinion. So now moving on, I'm going to talk about another firing that happened recently, and that's Dallas Mavericks GM Nico Harrison being fired by the Mavericks a couple weeks ago now. The Mavericks were 13-20 after the Luka Doncic trade last year in February. The Mavericks were 26-23 before the trade happened, and then after the trade happened, they just went completely downhill. As I mentioned, they had a 13-20 record between the last games of last season and then the beginning of this year before Nico Harrison was let go. They were 3-8 this year before Harrison was fired. And if you look at the record before the trade, they were still competitive, 26-23. This was a trade that nobody ever expected. And I thought in the short term, they would be somewhat better off because Anthony Davis is still a very good interior presence, still a very good defensive player when he's on the floor, can obviously get you buckets, can shoot the three, can help you spread the floor well. I thought they were going to be better off in the short term, but I was wrong about that. Obviously, the injuries did not help Nico's case in Dallas, which with Anthony Davis missing as many games as he's missed, that's definitely going to be an indictment on Nico. A lot of people are going to say, well, you traded Luka Doncic, who's been playing great basketball for the Lakers over the last just about year, we can say now at this point. It's been about 45 games that, each of those guys have been on their respective teams. 45 games later, and Luka Doncic is having the Lakers play at an excellent level while Dallas is struggling with Anthony Davis being out. Anthony Davis has only played in 14 games for Dallas over the last season, just about. He's only played in 14 games out of 52 possible games for the Mavericks, which he's averaged 20 points and 10 rebounds as a Mav in the 14 games he's played. But when you're only playing 14 out of 52 games, you're missing 38 games. That's a lot of games to miss. That's basically half a season you've missed during your time in Dallas. So that's part of the problem with that trade is you're trading for an injury-prone big man. And when AD's healthy, he's a very good player, but it's a major gamble, especially when you're trading Luka Doncic, who was 25 years old at the time of the trade. So obviously it was a big-time risk there by Nico Harrison. It ends up costing him his job. It takes a lot of guts to make a move like that. You don't make that move without ownership signing off on it, and I don't think the head coach wouldn't sign off on it either. I think you need probably everybody to sign off on that trade in order for it to happen. I know Jason Kidd said he didn't know about it when the trade went down, but honestly, when you make a big-time trade like that, I feel like the head coach, the GM, and ownership all have to be in alignment when you make a move like that, because that's a franchise-altering move, and obviously something that a lot of fans are very upset about, and rightfully so. At the end of the day, you're trading Luka Doncic before his even prime, probably. He was 25 years old when you made that trade, and you got an injury-prone big man back who has struggled to stay healthy over the last 2 seasons or so, and has struggled to stay healthy since Dallas traded for him in February. Now, sticking around in the NBA, I'm going to talk about the struggles of the LA Clippers and the Sacramento Kings, 2 teams I was higher on before the season began, and they've both been struggling early on. The Clippers currently sit at 5-12, and they are 12th in the Western Conference. First things first, this team will not be able to compete in the West without Kawhi Leonard being fully healthy, which isn't a hot take at all. They'll only go as far as Kawhi Leonard can take them if he's on the court, which is always a question mark, unfortunately, in this entire Kawhi Leonard era in LA. You can never count on him to be healthy, but when he is healthy, he is still a top 7 player in the game, in my opinion, even at 34 years old. He's still an unbelievable defensive machine, a very good scorer, but the main issue will always be the same for Kawhi, and that is health. In this season, he just returned yesterday from injury after missing 8 games. He played yesterday, and that marks his 7th game played this year. He's averaging 24 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 assists. He did miss 8 games already, which is disappointing, but he is now back. So hopefully the Clippers can go on some sort of a run. They're currently set at 5 wins and 12 losses. Derrick Jones Jr.'s injury was very tough for the Clippers. DJJ was playing so well and was always the first guy fighting for every loose ball for the Clippers. He did struggle to shoot from the three-pointer at times when he was out there with Chris Dunn. The offensive spacing was not great when both those guys are on the floor, and that was an issue since teams can kind of sag off each of them and end up, going back towards the paint, which makes it a little bit harder to get Zoo work in the interior and James Harden to drive. DJJ was playing well, though, averaging 10.5 points per game, which is a career high for him this year. He's going to be out around 4 weeks, and then will be reevaluated. Hopefully he's back in the lineup sooner rather than later. Bradley Beal is out for the year due to a hip injury. He didn't play well in the games when he was healthy. He only played in 6 games this season. It was disappointing, averaging 8 points a game off 37% shooting from the floor. Beal was a guy I was very high on. I was very excited to get him, especially in the offseason when the Clippers got rid of Norman Powell. Bradley Beal just seemed like a great fit in this lineup. And I stayed with Bradley Beal in the offseason this year and then even last year in Phoenix when he was a Sun. I said a lot of the time that Bradley Beal is still a bucket, He just wasn't worth the $50 million he was getting per year on his son's contract. Honestly, if he played in more games this year and was healthy, I do think he would have found his rhythm and would have been able to bounce back and revive his career like Russ did in LA for the Clippers. Beal's injury came at a tough time with Kawhi Leonard being out, and the Clippers were already losing a ton of games to start the year before that happened. Beal was supposed to be that secondary scorer next to Kawhi Leonard and James Harden. He was supposed to step in and basically replace Norman Powell's production. Norm was nearly an all-star last year. That's something that's important to say, that Norman Powell was great last year for the Clippers. He averaged 22 points per game off 42% shooting from three. The 2025-2026 season was the last year on Powell's deal, so the Clippers decided to move on from him in the offseason and trade him to Miami before the Clippers had to pay him. And in return, the Clippers got John Collins back in return, an athletic power forward with great lob threat ability who was set up to do very well next to James Harden. Collins has been okay to start his time with the Clippers. He's not really lived up to expectations, especially for a team with Kawhi Leonard out for a good amount of the start of the season and now Bradley Beal being out for the year. Collins isn't really playing that well. He's only averaging 11 points per game with 5 rebounds per game, shooting 33% from three. That is not great considering there are more shot opportunities with Beal being out and Kawhi Leonard being out for some time this season already. Now with Kawhi Leonard being back, I'm not sure Collins is going to get more shot opportunities. I do think the Clippers underestimated the value of Norman Powell in the lineup. And I'd even say I underestimated it as well because I thought Bradley Beal would be a seamless transition into this lineup, and I thought he'd be a great replacement for Norman Powell. Powell's a guy I've always been a fan of. When the Clippers made that move to trade for him in February 2022, I was thrilled the Clippers got him. He's a guy that I've always thought was a bucket and an underrated player. I remember when the Clippers had Russell Westbrook, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and James Harden in the same lineup. Powell was still one of my favorite players because he was a guy that always hustled, always cut to the basket, and always found a way to slash down the lane. And that's what the Clippers needed, a guy that could attack the rim and score in multiple ways. And that's something Norman Powell could do. He could score on all three levels. So I was a big fan of his. And with that being said, I underestimated his value in this lineup because I thought even with him leaving, I thought the Clippers could replace him with Bradley Beal. And obviously, if Beal was healthy, maybe that would have been different. But Beal obviously missing this season. It's not a great look for the Clips considering they end up losing Powell, and he's been doing great this year for Miami. Miami's been playing unreal to start the year, even with Tyler Hero being out, which Hero will be back tonight. But Miami being where they're at is very impressive, and Norman Powell is a big reason right now that they are 11-6, and they're doing really well. They are fourth right now in the Eastern Conference and have won 4 games in a row, getting a big win yesterday over the Sixers, who have played well to start the year. Yesterday, Norman Powell had 32 points and 4 rebounds. Khalil Ware is a guy that I'm a big fan of. He had 20 points and 16 rebounds alongside a block and 2 steals. And then my guy, Davion Mitchell, had 8 rebounds, 12 assists, and 8 points in yesterday's game. That Miami Heat team is playing with a lot of grit, and that's Norman Powell. He fits right into that lineup. A guy that plays with all heart, all hustle, doesn't complain, always gives it his all no matter what the score is. I just wish the Clippers had that still in their lineup because Powell's a guy that even if you're struggling from offense, he's a guy that any given moment can go off in a blink and hit 2 threes in a row or change a game by driving down the lane and dunking on someone or having a crazy layup. Powell always mixes up the energy. Wish he was still a Clipper, but I'm wishing him all the best in Miami. As I said, he always found a way to lift up the Clippers' offense with Kawhi Leonard being out. He carried the offense last season and was very close to being an all-star. I knew trading Powell would be tough, but I felt like Lawrence Frank getting Bradley Beal was a great safety net for the Clippers. And now we see that obviously wasn't the case with Bradley Beal now being hurt for the year. The Clippers' main issue is their age, which is their reason that they're fragile and injury-prone. Kawhi Leonard's 34, Harden 37, Brook Lopez is 37, Chris Paul, who doesn't play too much, is 40 years old, and he will be retiring after this year is over. Bradley Beal is 32 years old, and then Nick Batum is 36 years old, turning 37 very soon. The Clippers had the oldest roster in the NBA heading into this season, which I knew was a risk, but with their talent level and how 90% of last year's rotation was returning this year, and that was a team last year that took Denver to 7 games in the playoffs, with all of those guys for the most part being back besides Amir Coffey and Norman Powell. I thought they would be able to ball out this year. With that being said, it's early on in the season. I've not given up on this team. I still think they have a chance to potentially make a run. Right now, they're only a game or so out of the play-in tournament, if the way things ended right now. There's still a lot of basketball left to be played, so the Clippers have a chance to figure things out at some point now with Kawhi Leonard being healthy. But I do obviously miss Norman Powell in a Clipper uniform. I do wish Bradley Beal was healthy. It's tough to look at it right now and you say we could have had Norman Powell and maybe we'd have been better off right now. But the Clippers didn't want to pay Norman Powell because they wanted everybody to be off their books after the conclusion of next season, which is the 2026-2027 NBA season. Powell was going to get probably a 4 or 5 year deal from Miami potentially. The Clippers didn't want to pay him that because they wanted everybody off the books after next season is over with. The only player after that year that will be under contract still for the Clippers, if I remember correctly, will be just Ivica Zubac and maybe one other player potentially. But that's why the Clippers did what they did. They traded Paul because they didn't want to pay him, and now obviously it's hurt us not having him in the lineup. I did go to the Clippers-Celtics game last Sunday at the TD Garden. I was down on the Clippers heading into that game. It felt like this year was already over for us before seeing that game. But after seeing them play in person and fight back down 24 points in the second half to nearly tie the game at the buzzer, I was very impressed with the Clippers. I was impressed by their hustle. I was impressed by their fight. It was reminiscent of the Clippers of old, the team that I fell in love with back in 2021 when they were all dogs on that team, and no matter what the score was, they fought for every loose ball, and no deficit was too large for them to come back from. That team last Sunday, it kind of gave me some flashbacks to that old Clippers team from 2021, 2022, where I became a big fan of them because, as I said, no lead was safe against them ever. No deficit was too large for them to not come back from. They always found a way to fight back in games, and that's what they did last Sunday. James Harden was ridiculous in that game. He had 32 points in the second half with 5 rebounds and 5 assists. Also adding in 4 of 8 shooting from 3 in the second half. He's been a bright spot for the Clippers this year, and he looks like an all-star again. He really is a timeless superstar. Another guy that stood out in that game in person was Kobe Sanders, who is a rookie for the Clippers. He was the 50th overall pick in the 2025 NBA draft. Sanders hustled nonstop in that game, was making plays on both ends of the floor. He finished that game with 11 points, 6 rebounds, and 2 assists, adding in a steal. He was also 4 of 7 from the floor and 2 of 3 from 3. He's a very good player, and that's a guy that I've become a lot more confident in more and more as I watch him play. I left that game against the Celtics saying we got something with Kobe Sanders. Dude is a baller and a great hustler. I think an absolute gem, especially considering they took him at 50th overall pick. I was more optimistic about this Clippers team after that loss. I felt like the energy was going to shift at some point. One thing that people can't criticize about James Harden is his will to still try to win ball games on his own. He's been awesome this year, putting the Clippers on his back. He's completely turned back time and looks like the James Harden of old from his Houston days. He should be an all-star yet again. In a star-studded Western Conference, James Harden should be an all-star again this year. He's averaging 28 points, 6 rebounds, 8 assists off 39% shooting from 3 with 1.5 stocks per game. On Saturday of this past weekend, James Harden had a franchise single-game record with 55 points, also adding in 7 assists, 3 rebounds, and a steal, shooting 10 of 16 from 3 and 17 of 26 from the floor overall. He led the Clippers to a 131-116 win over Charlotte, which was very impressive. He had 35 points at the half and 27 points in the first quarter. That was one of the best quarters I've seen from a player ever. And this is James Harden, who is 37 years old, still putting up monster numbers at his age, which is very impressive. And honestly, doesn't get talked about enough because of the Clippers' bad record. It doesn't get talked about enough, but James Harden is 37 years old, still putting up big-time superstar numbers. Kawhi Leonard did return to the lineup yesterday for the Clippers. He had 20 points off 6 of 13 shooting from the floor, adding in 3 rebounds, 2 assists, and 3 steals. Good to see Kawhi Leonard back in the lineup. The Clippers did lose that game, but they had their chances. They were in the game late in the fourth quarter. Hopefully the Clippers can make a run with the rest of the season. There's still a lot of games left to be played. They do have the Grizzlies 2 times in the next few weeks and also a struggling Dallas team as well on the schedule in the next couple weeks. So they have chances to figure things out. They do play the LA Lakers tomorrow night at 11 o'clock. That won't be an easy game, but that's a game the Clippers have gotten up for in the past. They've beaten the Lakers a good amount over the last 3 or 4 seasons, so hopefully the Clippers can find a way to bounce back and get that win tomorrow night. We'll see what happens. I do think at some point the Clippers are going to make a move, and I think they should go out and get my guy, DeMar DeRozan. DeRozan is a guy who is obviously up there in age. He's 36 years old, but the Clippers are lacking a scoring threat next to Kawhi Leonard and James Harden, which if you go out and get a guy like DeMar DeRozan, he could score off the dribble. He's a good shot creator. And with Bradley Beal being out for the year, Norman Powell no longer being in the lineup, and Bogdan Bogdanovic struggling with injuries and also not really living up to the expectations of being a scoring threat off the bench, having DeMar DeRozan, I don't think is going to hurt this lineup. And one thing I want to say is, in the past, every player that I've wanted, the Clippers have gone out and gotten for me. So I can't complain if they don't go out and get DeMar DeRozan. I wanted John Wall, they got John Wall. I wanted Russell Westbrook, they got Russell Westbrook. I wanted James Harden, they got James Harden. I wanted Derrick Jones Jr., they got Derrick Jones Jr. I wanted Nick Batum, they got Nick Batum back after he left the Sixers in free agency. I wanted Bradley Beal this past offseason, they got me Bradley Beal this past offseason. I know, obviously, a lot of those moves haven't worked out for the Clippers, but in the past, when I've wanted a player, they have gone out and got him. DeMar DeRozan, it would be great to see him in a Clippers uniform, and I don't think it's going to cost a lot. This Sacramento Kings team is very much going to be in a rebuild very soon, so I would not expect it to be a heavy price tag to go out and get DeRozan. I think the Clippers could get DeRozan for John Collins and a second-round pick. DeMar DeRozan has $24.2 million left on his deal after this season ends, so $24.2 million for the 2026-2027 NBA season. And he has $10 million guaranteed next year. The Clippers would add a scoring threat, as I said, next to Kawhi and Harden, which would be huge. And then in return, the Kings would be getting a second-round pick to help their rebuild and also an expiring contract with John Collins. I think potentially they'd love to get more guys off the books, and potentially trading DeMar DeRozan would get, obviously, a year of his contract next year off of the books for them. So I don't think it would be a bad move for them either. The Kings right now are 14th in the Western Conference with a 4-13 record overall, second worst team in the Western Conference, and tied for, I think it's the fifth worst record in the NBA. So a very disappointing start to the season for Sacramento. This is a team that at one point lost 8 games in a row between November 7th and November 20th, with all 8 of those losses being double-digit losses. The worst being a 33-point loss to Atlanta without Trae Young on the floor for the Hawks. They did beat Denver on Saturday night, which is a big-time win. Russell Westbrook played very well. He had 15 points in the fourth quarter of that game. But this year has been very disappointing for the Kings. I had a bold take about this team in the offseason that they were going to surprise some people and be a playoff team in the West. But obviously I was wrong about that. I know the Clippers are struggling to begin the year, but I have a lot more faith in them to turn things around than this Sacramento Kings team. I'm a big fan of Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Russell Westbrook, Domantas Sabonis, Dennis Schroeder, and Malik Monk. They have a lot of talented players on this roster, and I'm a big fan of those guys, so I went with my heart over my head making this decision when I made the prediction in the offseason that they were going to be a playoff team. Things are just not working out for this team. First off, their schedule was impossible to begin the season. They played Oklahoma City 3 times and Denver 2 times in the first 15 games of the year. So the first third of their games to begin the year in the first 15 games were against Denver and Oklahoma City, which is very difficult, especially considering those are 2 top teams in the NBA, maybe the 2 best teams overall. And then you add in the fact that they have been one of the worst defensive teams in the NBA this season, a 121 defensive rating, which is 3rd worst in the NBA, which is not necessarily a surprise. I figured they would struggle defensively, but the real issue is their offense has been so terrible. I was expecting a lot more of this offense considering their talent, but like people said in the offseason, spacing would be an issue for this team, and shooting would be an issue for this team, and that still is very much the case. They have a 109.5 offensive rating to begin the season, which is 5th worst in the NBA. They lack spacing, which was expected, but I thought with all of the talent they had, I was optimistic that they could figure things out. I was wrong about that, obviously. Domantas Sabonis' injury has not helped the team. Neither has Dennis Schroeder's struggles. Sabonis will be out at least another 3 to 4 weeks with a left knee injury, so he had a partial meniscus tear, and that's definitely a big-time loss there for that Kings lineup, and potentially maybe even trying to trade him. It'll be a little bit difficult to move him now if he has that injury, and obviously the big price tag. Russell Westbrook has been a bright light for this team, averaging 14 points, 7 rebounds, and 6 assists, with 39% shooting from 3 in his age 37 season. This is a guy that everybody gave up on and didn't want to sign in the offseason. But every team in the NBA could use a Russell Westbrook right now for his energy, his playmaking ability, and his relentless effort. I do expect the Kings to blow things up at some point. They do own their first-round picks from 2026 through 2030, so they have more of an option to tank and blow things up, unlike the Clippers, who don't own their draft picks over the next few years. The Oklahoma City own the Clippers draft pick in 2026, and they also own a pick swap of the Clippers draft pick in 2027, and then in 2028, the Philadelphia 76ers own the Clippers draft pick, and then in 2029, the Philadelphia 76ers have the right to swap picks with the LA Clippers. So the Clippers don't own their draft picks over the next 4 NBA drafts. Unlike the Kings, who own all of those picks between 2026 and 2030, it makes sense for them to potentially rebuild and go out and tank and go and get players that can help them rebuild, and obviously get draft picks as well that can help them restart a new era. Tanking doesn't make as much sense for the Clippers. I think the Clippers are going to double down and buy back into this era even more by potentially trading away a piece like John Collins and maybe a few second-round picks to go out and try to improve this roster in the current moment and squeeze out more potential out of the Kawhi Leonard and James Harden era. The Kings do have players that teams would want. Zach LaVine's averaging 21 points per game, about 40% shooting from three. He's a star that teams will be interested in. The issue is his contract still has around a $50 million player option for next season. DeMar DeRozan is averaging 18 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists with 36% shooting from three. He's 36 years old, but he's still a bucket. Had a big-time shot in the clutch against Denver on Saturday, which was an and one on a mid-range jump shot that got him to the free throw line and helped close out that game against the Nuggets. DeRozan can still score in big-time moments. He still creates his own shot very well. I expect some teams to be interested in him at the trade deadline or potentially even before it. We'll see how things work out for Sacramento. They're still a team that has potential, but where they currently stand right now at 4-13 and Domantas Sabonis being out, I do expect them to blow things up at some point and trade away those pieces like Dennis Schroeder, like Malik Monk, like DeMar DeRozan, like Zach LaVine, potentially even Domantas Sabonis and Russell Westbrook. I expect them to move on from some of those players in the next month or so. Now moving on to a team that rebuilt very well, and now they're a potential dynasty. The Oklahoma City Thunder, they're 16-1 to begin the year with 8 straight wins over the last 8 games. Oklahoma City hasn't even had Jalen Williams in the lineup to begin the year, and they're still balling out without him. SGA is still doing his thing, 32 points, 5 rebounds, 7 assists per game on the year. Chet Holmgren is averaging a career high in points with 19 points per game. Cason Wallace has been a very underrated guard for the Thunder this year, averaging 9 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, and 2.4 steals per game. With a surplus of first-round picks that they have in the lottery over the next 5 years or so, they can take risks and miss on lottery picks without there being much of a consequence. And that's not the case for every team in the NBA. When a team has a top draft pick, a lot of the time they need to get it right because they don't want to be picking high again, and they also don't have the surplus of draft picks that Oklahoma City has. So every single draft pick means that much more when you don't have that many top draft picks. For the Thunder, though, it's a little bit different. They've missed on top picks in recent years, and it really hasn't hurt them because they hit on guys like Jalen Williams, like Chet Holmgren, like Cason Wallace, hitting on SGA in a big-time trade with the Clippers. They've really figured things out and gotten a lot of pieces right. They did miss on some draft picks. Like I said, they can miss on some because of how many top lottery picks they have. They can miss on some, and it doesn't hurt them as much as it hurt other teams if they missed out on a draft pick. Look at Ousmane Dieng, a guy they took 11th overall in the 2022 NBA draft. He hasn't even played that much and is really much an end-of-the-rotation type of player for them so far in his first 3 seasons or 4 seasons in the NBA. And it doesn't even hurt them that much. They still won the NBA Finals last year, and they're set up to potentially win again this year. Credit to Sam Presti. He stayed committed to their rebuild for a few years and created a dynasty. They do own the Clippers draft pick in 2026 and have the rights to swap picks with the Clippers in 2027. So they will be adding more talent to this roster at some point very soon. The Detroit Pistons are another team that rebuilt very well in recent years. They've won 12 straight games, the Detroit Pistons, and are right now the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. They are currently 14-2 overall with 12 straight wins. They are 10-2 in the East, and they've looked really good to begin the year. Cade Cunningham's averaging 27 points, 5 rebounds, and 10 assists off 29% shooting from 3. He's been very impressive overall to begin the year. And then you also look at a guy like Jalen Duren, who's averaging 21 points and 12 rebounds to begin the year, also adding in 2 stocks per game. Like I said before, Jalen Duren will be a top 3 big man in this league, and he's showing that potential right now. I've been a big fan of JD over the last few seasons, and I've been saying he could be a top 3 big man at some point in the NBA, and he's seeing that potential growing right now. This is quite a turnaround for this Pistons team, number 1 team in the Eastern Conference to begin the year, 12 straight wins. And if you look at this team from a couple years ago, at one point, they set the record for the most consecutive losses with 28 losses in a row in the 2023-2024 NBA season. And I remember looking back at that moment, and I remember saying to myself, okay, they're really struggling right now in the current moment, but I also liked their direction. They had some good young pieces to build around, like Jaden Ivey, Cade Cunningham, Jalen Duren. I recall recording an episode during that stretch where they lost 20-plus games in a row. I don't know if I recorded one after the 28th loss, but I remember recording an episode during that bad stretch, and I remember saying that in a few years, they're going to figure things out and be dangerous, and you're seeing that right now. You're seeing that come to play right now. They've won 12 straight games, and if you look at this team 2 years ago in the 2023-2024 NBA season, they only won 14 games that year. 14 games that entire season. And then you look at this year, they've won 12 straight games and are now a legitimate threat in the Eastern Conference. So credit to them in their rebuild. They've really figured things out, and they've been an exciting team to watch to begin the year. Cade Cunningham is playing at an MVP level right now, and the Eastern Conference is weaker than in the past. Detroit's in a good spot to go out and potentially add another piece of the deadline that can maybe take them over the top. Low-key, Zach LaVine would be a good fit as a shooter and a shot creator in that lineup, but I'm not sure if they want to take on his big-time contract with the $50+ million player option for next season. Anyways, that'll wrap up this episode. I plan on recording another episode in the next couple of days to talk about a few trades that have happened in the MLB over the last week or so. I'm going to save that for another day, though. But that'll wrap up this episode. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to this. As always, I appreciate it. I hope you guys have a good one. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you.